Hello, this is Tim Congdon, Chairman of the Institute of International Monetary Research at the University of Buckingham. This is our monthly video being prepared now at the end of October 2021. It's over 18 months since the announcement of the COVID emergency back in March 2020. And we can perhaps begin to see the prospect of the return of medical normality. But we have got inflation. In practically all the world's leading economies, inflation is higher than it was back in early 2020. And people are asking, how high will it go? How long will it last? Might it indeed even reach double digits at an annual rate as it happened back in the 1970s? And I want today to try and answer these questions. It's fair to say that experts on the whole haven't covered themselves in glory in the last 18 months in all sorts of ways. Let me reiterate that a return to medical normality does seem in prospect. Just in today's Daily Telegraph, the suggestion is that in Britain, the number of COVID cases will be falling this winter, not rising. So let's just go back to what I said at the start of this very unusual period. This is something I said in a presentation back in April last year. I said then, because it was clear that there was an extraordinary surge in money growth taking place in all the leading economies because of the way in which governments and central banks were responding to COVID. I said that the sequel would be an inflationary boom. We couldn't be sure whether inflation would peak at 5% or 10%. Let's just be clear that much of what I said at that time has proved correct. And I even said that the subject of double-digit inflation, we may get bottlenecks and supply shortages, certainly been that. The energy price slump of spring 2020 could be followed in due course by an energy price surge, and then, if so, a 10% inflation rate would be a logical consequence of the money supply explosion then being recorded. Now, we have in the last few weeks had another jump in energy prices. The gas price has doubled or trebled depending upon which particular market you're looking at. And the oil price has reached $85 a barrel, well above the levels in late 2019 and early 2020. So this is really why we have to consider the possibility of double-digit inflation. Now, I do want to emphasize the validity of correctness of what I said 18 months ago. And it all turned upon the evident at that stage surge in money growth and the belief that the quantity of money is important to inflation. It was not at all the majority view. And even in the last few months, the mainstream view has been very equivocal about these subjects. Let's look, for example, at what Professor Paul Krugman has been saying in his New York Times column. Krugman is often regarded as the world's most influential newspaper columnist, and I suppose therefore he's an expert of sorts. As I said, experts haven't covered themselves in glory in this period, but anyway, let's just look at what Paul Krugman says. This was back in June, when he said that the inflation panic is, so last week. Seriously, both recent data and recent statements from the Federal Reserve have deflated the case for a sustained outbreak of inflation. Now, he's changed his tune because just a few days ago, in a column on the 15th of October, he said, well, are we sure that this inflation increase is a blip? Economists are deeply divided. basically what has come to be known as team transitory, thinking this is the transitory, but I might be wrong. Wow. The data are ambiguous and so on. Well, Professor Krugman, the data aren't ambiguous. The data are indicating very clearly that inflation has increased sharply, and they confirm the importance of behaviour of money growth, as I've been emphasising over the last 18 months, and as I'm afraid, Paul Krugman, you've been ignoring. Let me then, in trying to answer this question whether we get double-digit inflation, by looking at a chart of the rate of money growth in the leading nations. We can look at annual growth rates, and let's take it, we're going to go back to the start of 2019. We're going to look at the USA, the Eurozone, Japan, and the UK. Now, I'd like you to notice that there was a slight acceleration in money growth in the USA before spring 2020. Then as the COVID policy response led to this surge in money growth, the USA was well ahead of other countries. You have the sort of the Eurozone in the UK in the middle, and Japan at the bottom. But also notice that in the last 6 months to a year, money growth has fallen away again. It hasn't fallen back to where it was in the 2010s, as I'll explain shortly. The growth of money and nominal GDP are related. A key proposition in all of the work from the Institute of International Monetary Research. And so we've got these fantastic growth rates of the USA, in the USA and elsewhere. We've got to think about what they mean for the future path of nominal GDP and inflation. Well, first of all, if there's going to be double-digit inflation, it's going to be in the USA. The situation in Europe and the UK, not so serious, but the UK peak money growth rate in annual terms was 15.3%, quite a bit less than in the USA, where it was 26%. And in Japan, there wasn't really much of a money growth upturn at all. There was a little blip in spring 2020, but it was quite minor. So that's then saying that in the USA should have the highest inflation. That's where we should focus our analysis. Just in qualification, I would say that the trend rate of real output growth is higher in the USA at present. Trend growth of output in the USA may be 2%. That should be deducted from the money growth rate to get the inflation rate, trend inflation rate. In Europe and the UK, you've got expensive measures to control climate, and you've also got, at the moment, very weak demographic influences on growth because the populations of working age are actually going down. So that may mitigate to some extent the argument that inflation will be higher in the USA. Anyway, we're going to focus on the US in answering this question about are we going to get double-digit inflation. Now, back in June, the analysis that the Institute did was very different from Paul Krugman's. We noticed that there'd been emphasised, of course, that there had been this surge in money growth. And then we said, in 2020, the velocity of circulation collapsed. People let the money pile up in their bank balances. To some extent, they put it into the stock market, some extent they put it into houses, but actually the price level didn't respond in the way you might expect immediately. There were some lags in the process. So the velocity of circulation fell very sharply. In the medium long run, it'll return back towards its more normal equilibrium levels, the kind seen in 2018 and 2019. So let's take it, in this exercise we did in June, the velocity returns at the end of next year, 2022, to a level just a little bit beneath, 5% beneath its average in 2018 and 2019. We'll assume that there's a slowdown in money growth as well between the first quarter of 2021 and the end of 2022. And what does that then imply about the behaviour of nominal GDP between the first quarter of 21 and the fourth quarter of 2022. We're kind of assuming a return to normality. Velocity returns to normal, the medical normality is restored, and we're just assuming that money growth comes back to a more moderate level from now on. Well, the answer was that US nominal GDP had to rise by 30%. 30%. Now, obviously, a somewhat alarming conclusion, despite the plausibility, the simplicity of the assumptions that go into the exercise. And from that, we then said that inflation is likely to be between 5% and 10% in the USA for another couple of years. Maybe it'll take longer to return to equilibrium velocity, I don't know. Maybe US money growth will not go down to 4% a year, it'll go down to nil or may even contract, I don't know. However, this is the kind of framework in which, in my view, inflation should be analysed and discussed. And it's worth noting here, if you think that the conclusion I drew was hysterical, that in fact the increase in US retail sales in nominal terms in the year to September was 13.9%, the kind of number that exactly fits a 30% jump in nominal GDP in that 8-quarter period. So obviously we're reaching kind of conclusion that inflation's at rather high levels, is around for some time, although my chart earlier did move down towards the end of the period. Let's look at these business surveys, which always we want to use as a kind of backup to the monetary analysis. This shows you price rises, price pressures in manufacturing, US manufacturing. September's the last value. May have come off a bit in recent months, recent weeks. In the service sector, not so really. The service sector is bigger than manufacturing, and price pressures are still very close to their peak. Now, both of these business survey results came out before the big surge in energy prices I just was talking about. So we've had that energy price surge. Quantifying its impact on consumer prices is quite difficult because the natural gas price in the spot market can double or treble or quadruple, but most gas is supplied on long-term contracts. Oil price, of course, is somewhat different, and the impact there will come through it in different ways in different countries, but that should be more immediate. I think a reasonable view is that there'll be an addition to the price level in the next few months, winter and spring, winter of 2021 and spring of 2022, of perhaps 0.4% to 1% in most countries, depending upon the time period you're thinking about and so on. But another shock to the price level. This may prove transitory, I accept that, but it's going to push up the numbers in the next few months. Now, enough data is available for 2021 that on reasonable projections of kind of 0.4% a month increases, possibly 0.5% because of the energy price numbers, we're going to get 7% consumer price inflation in the USA at the end of this year. It'll be a bit different if you look at the consumer price index as such and the deflator for personal consumption expenditures, which is used by the Fed. But this sort of 7% number seems to me to be about right. What about 2022? Well, I've been arguing that inflation pressures will be higher next year than this year. That fits with the business surveys, it fits with the analysis of money growth and so on that I've just given. Sure, the peak in money growth was spring 2020. Isn't 2022 a long way away? The lags in this process often are about 2 years. Milton Friedman, when he was asked how long is the lag between money and inflation, would say 2 years. This all fits. The underlying driver here is the notion that the stability to hold money by companies, households, and so on is stable. That in that sense, the quantity theory of money works. Well, you must draw your own conclusions about that. Obviously, you might want now to think about 2023. Well, are we going to get back to 2% inflation by 2023 or 2024? Let's take it that that stability of money holding preferences is a fact, is an assumption, is true. Then we need to have, in the USA and other countries as well, to have 2% inflation. We need to have money growth at an annual rate of under 5%, and really somewhere between about 1% and 5%. In the USA, in the 10 years to the end of 2018, the average rate of money growth was exactly 3%, 3.0%. So what's been happening in the USA to money growth in 2021? What I have here are two lines. One is for the 3-month annualized growth rate, and the other is the 6-monthly annualized growth rate of M3. I'm afraid that both of these lines are well above still the 3% line. I think that the kind of money growth rate we've recorded so far in 2021 is consistent with inflation coming down to, say, 5-6% or so in 2024 and 2023 and perhaps 2024, looking ahead a long way. But it isn't down to the numbers consistent with 2% inflation. The Federal Reserve hasn't done anything like enough to achieve that. So let me kind of now bring this all together. It may be still rather extreme to talk about double-digit inflation in the USA. You know, money growth has come back somewhat. Obviously, monetary policy is soon to be tightened. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to be talking about a peak inflation rate of 8 or 9%. So there is still a lot of work to be done to get inflation back under control. Now then, to finish, let me just come back quickly to the other side of the Atlantic. In the UK, where I've followed the subject for over 40 years, I've always paid a lot of attention to business surveys, including the survey from the Confederation of British Industry, produce a monthly piece of work on what companies are planning to do. And this chart shows that the price-raising intentions of British companies in the latest survey for October 2021 are the highest since 2004, which really means actually since we had double-digit inflation in 1990. So we are heading in the UK on this reasonable piece of information, which has got quite a good track record, for inflation in coming months at the highest levels for 30 years. This is the result of excessive money growth, whatever one says about the various problems of interpretation that one has in this subject. The same kind of comment can be made about the Eurozone and the behavior of the European Central Bank. Both the Bank of England and the ECB are to blame for what's going on, as is the Federal Reserve of the United States. In Japan, well, they will miss this. And at a deeper level here, the problem is an intellectual one, that most experts, most economic experts, so-called experts, don't look at the behavior of the quantity of money. This is certainly true in the USA, where Paul Krugman has a great deal more influence than I have. The subject, therefore, we need to be thinking much more about what's going on in economics as an academic discipline. I'm not optimistic that we'll get back quickly to 2% inflation while economists continue to ignore the behavior of the quantity of money. Yes, Japan has been lucky here. Does that mean the Bank of Japan has got special insights, expertise, and so on? Well, I wish it were true. Thank you.